Please like and subscribe. The Nutcracker's march. Crystal focused her druidic magic, allowing her innate connection with nature to flow through her like a stream. The white rose seedlings, emboldened by the raw magic of nature itself, sprouted forth from the soil in a vibrant, perfect cluster. She updated the stockbook for the event using a floral pen she had been gifted by her boss before putting it in her pocket. Crystal instilled a bit more of her magic, tying it off so that the flowers would maintain their perfection and life for an extended amount of time. She then took the flowers and placed them into the floral shop's chill room. It was the 100th flower arrangement for an upcoming wedding. Normally, Heather, the owner of Evergreen and Rosemary, would have assisted, but her divine talent had been polluted when she had linked up with a magical nexus at a summer camp. Or so she had explained to Crystal. Crystal had heard her boss was regaining some sense of control and balance through the tutelage of a fae of the spring court. Crystal hoped the information was accurate. While she had been able to hire a couple more people to help out around the shop, while Heather was recovering, Crystal was the only one capable of keeping the store consistently in stock. A chunk of the flowers were grown naturally, of course, but the more exotic buds required magic. Druid magic itself was a rare talent outside the Fae realm, and at 16, when Crystal wasn't working, she had school and wanted to have something close to a normal teenage life. But she couldn't be too unhappy. Heather was making sure she was being compensated in her new role of shop manager and for overtime. The bell over the door rang, and Crystal sighed before putting on a welcoming smile and turning toward the customer. Said customer leaned over the counter and kissed her enthusiastically on the mouth. She returned the gesture in kind before remembering she was at work and stepping back. "Tyler," she scolded, but her warm cheeks and smile hardly matched her tone. Tyler returned the smile in kind, shrugged, and began cleaning up the counter. He had been helping out around the shop when it was closing time, before walking Crystal home, or in the case of tonight, their date. Crystal shook her head and began to put away tools and decor supplies herself. "So," asked Tyler, "Thanksgiving is next week." And Crystal drew out the word as if she didn't know what he was asking. "And," Tyler said, "are you going to stay in town or go with your dad to his girlfriend's?" Crystal bit her lower lip and looked upward as if she was lost in thought while she twirled a finger in her red hair. "Babe," Tyler said, annoyed. He hated it when she got all ditzy. He had mentioned how he wasn't a big fan of people who played dumb or oblivious. Crystal would occasionally, though playfully, enact that very quality. Crystal offered him a warm smile. "As a matter of fact, I will be joining you for Thanksgiving." Tyler pulled her close and kissed her again. She couldn't help but melt into his kiss. Tyler's love language was definitely physical touch. If he wasn't kissing her, he was hugging her, holding her hand, or cuddling up next to her. They had been dating since their sophomore year of high school, but had been friends since first grade. One of the benefits of living in a small town, well, benefits if you fall into the right crowd of peers. After a moment, Tyler broke away first this time. "Sorry, I cut you off." "It was for a good reason," Crystal said with a smile. Tyler smiled back. "But while my dad said I could do Thanksgiving with your family, that Christmas would be with him and Amanda. Her family wants to meet the amazing daughter of the amazing man Amanda's been dating." "I know I've only met her a few times, but she does seem nice," said Tyler. Crystal nodded, then made sure everything was in order and moved toward the shop alarm. Tyler made his way to the door. After Crystal plugged in the code, she hustled over to Tyler, and the both of them stepped outside into the chilling evening air. She turned and locked the shop up, and after a quick push on the door to make sure everything was secure, placed her hand in Tyler's as they headed to the Witch's Brew Bakery and Sandwich Shop for their dinner date. It was currently just after 5. "She is great, and the two of them have been dating for the last 6 months. I really do like her," Crystal finally answered. It had been a warm morning, so she had left her winter jacket in her car. They had walked in the opposite direction towards the bakery and sandwich shop. Tyler, sensing her discomfort, slid off his winter coat and put it on her. "You'll get cold," said Crystal. "Babe, I'm a werewolf. I'm fine," said Tyler as he placed his arm over her shoulders before making sure the street was clear, and they raced across the street. "Resilience isn't the same thing as immunity, and you're more resilient in your wolf form," Crystal argued. "Babe, I love that you're worried about me, but really, I'm good, and I'll be even better once we get to the bakery." He then quickened his pace, and Crystal focused on her own 2 feet so she could keep up. She stood at 5'7", while Tyler was just over 6 feet. Despite their increased pace, Tyler made sure he wasn't pushing her and kept an eye out for ice spots on the sidewalk. A hurried but cautious 5 minutes later, the two of them found themselves inside the Witch's Brew bakery. "Welcome in," called Nick from behind the counter as he was boxing up 2 pumpkin pies. He normally worked just a grave shift, but had come in a couple of hours early. The holiday season was fast approaching, and he could use the extra cash. "Over here," called a voice from a booth. Tyler noted his older stepbrother Eric was at a booth alone. Crystal waved at Eric and made her way over, while Tyler headed to the counter. Dylan, who was manning the cash register, gestured at 3 plates. 2 club sandwiches with extra bacon and fries, and a chicken Caesar salad with extra chicken. Tyler reached for his wallet. Dylan held up his hand. "No need, Eric already paid." "Cool," Tyler said as he reached for the 3 plates, but Dylan grabbed the salad. "Let me help." The two made their way over to the booth. Tyler placed the 2 club sandwiches down, one in front of his stepbrother and one in front of his girlfriend. Dylan placed the salad in front of Tyler before asking, "Drinks?" "Hot chocolate," the 3 of them responded in unison. Dylan nodded and headed back into the kitchen to get them made. "Sorry to interrupt your date night," said Eric. "If you're paying, feel free to interrupt whenever you want," Tyler said as he sprinkled on bacon bits, croutons, and blue cheese dressing onto his salad before savagely digging in. "Bro, you are one of a kind," said Eric. "But he's my one of a kind," Crystal responded as she dipped one of her fries in fry sauce and bit down. The fries were quite warm, and she savored that warmth as it enhanced the taste of the fries. "You're a lucky lady," Eric said with a hint of sarcasm before taking a bite out of his club sandwich. "So," said Crystal, "what can I help you with?" "Right. I don't want to get you in trouble, but I was wondering if you could tell me what Gwendolyn Harp's favorite flower is." "Tulips," answered Crystal. Gwen was new in town, having just moved here about a couple of months ago, but had become a regular at the flower shop, always coming in to get a couple arrangement of multicolored tulips for her office and home. She was the new personal assistant to Mr. Gold, Normal's bank president. She was also an aspiring romance author. She had a couple of self-published books on booklovers.com. "Why do you ask?" Crystal continued, her tone feigning innocence. "He's lonely," Tyler responded dryly. Before Eric could answer, Nick placed down 3 steaming hot chocolates. "How could he be lonely with me as his roommate?" "I wasn't aware you two were keeping each other warm at night," said Tyler. Eric kicked him under the table and Crystal elbowed him in the side. "Hey," he cried out, "it was just a joke." "A bad one," said Eric. Nick just walked away, shaking his head, a large grin on his face. Eric, needing a break from the pack house, and Nick, needing some space from the gargoyle nest, had decided to split rent in a 2-bedroom apartment. Rumors quickly spread around town that the 2 best friends were progressing their friendship. "It's been a while since my last girlfriend, and Gwen happened to catch my attention. I just want to increase my chances of getting a yes if I ask her out," Eric clarified. "Never hurts to show you're paying attention when making a first impression," said Crystal, just not her whole life story. Tyler snorted. "We live in a small town. I think that's a pretty hard thing to avoid. Either you come clean or the town starts spinning its own tall tales." Eric shrugged. "If the town scares her off, that's one thing. I would prefer it not be me." "Our dad's the sheriff, and we're a pack of werewolves," Tyler responded dryly. "I'm human. I was adopted by a pack of werewolves." "Compelling argument. Let me know how that works out for you," Tyler offered with a grin. Eric kicked him again. It was an hour later. The 3 of them had just finished dessert. Dylan was closing down the register for the day. They only took cards during the grave shift. He could drop the day's cash deposit off at Gold Bank. It was open 24/7. Not surprising when the bank president was a gold dragon. Never a missed opportunity to get money. Nick was in the kitchen preparing bread and pie crusts for tomorrow. The handful of remaining customers were starting to dwindle back outside when a blood-curdling scream cut through the night, followed shortly by an alarm blaring from all cell phones. Each one of them simultaneously going off with the same message, both on their screens and verbally, "Red alert, normal is under attack, red alert, normal is under attack." Everyone in the Witch's Brew looked at each other with fear and confusion. The red alert had been newly implemented a month ago as a response to the town's concern regarding the random attacks that had been occurring. While things had calmed down significantly, thanks to adding in the gargoyles as additional law enforcement to the town's werewolves, things still did occasionally get exciting around the town, to say the least. "Does anyone else hear the March of the Nutcracker?" asked Tyler. The nun werewolves all gave him a look, until a moment later, they could also make out the melody, slightly muffled as it was coming from outside. "That can't be good," Eric stated before heading outside. "Is he seriously heading towards the danger?" Crystal said, annoyed. "Stay here," Dylan ordered as he and Nick headed outside as well. While autumn had a normal chill in the air, it was much closer to freezing temperatures as snow was beginning to fall. Trumpets and other instruments could be made out clearly as the music seemed to be getting louder. Other patrons of Normal had made their way out onto the street, a majority of businesses just closing down. Most people turned towards the direction they believed the scream had come from. That's when they noticed them. Nutcrackers, pristinely painted, red-coated with drum major hats upon their heads. In their hands, each of them held a saber held upright, while the golems were clearly made of wood. The steel sabers glistened in the light of the setting sun. Very real, very sharp, and some of them covered in blood. It wasn't long before the screaming of sirens mixed in with the Nutcracker's melody, some quite a distance away, others clearly getting closer. Eric pulled out his gun and opened fire on one of the lead Nutcrackers. He released 3 shots. 1 struck the Nutcracker's head, 2 into its chest. It was unfazed by the damage, but it focused its attention on Eric. It broke ranks and rushed forward, sword raised high so it could strike down. Blindage, shield, cast Dylan, allowing his light arcane magic to coalesce into 3 miniature barriers around Eric, Nick, and himself. Thankfully, most of the townspeople had retreated back into their shops. The Nutcracker closed the distance quickly and brought his blade down, with surprising force, being made of wood. Eric dodged to the side. Nick, who had shifted to full gargoyle, slid around the Nutcracker's backside and leaped upon its back. His claws, which dug into stone like tissue paper, found quick purchase in the golem's back, and he quickly began ripping out chunks of the creature's body. In short order, the Nutcracker sustained sufficient damage that the magic providing its sibilance of life diminished, and the golem collapsed to the ground, fully inert. "That wasn't so bad," Nick said with triumph. "Watch out!" cried Dylan in response as the 5 other Nutcrackers rushed forward, perceiving the threat that Nick possessed, each ready to strike. Crystal, thinking quickly, unleashed her druidic magic on the enchanted lumber rushing towards the 3 men, and aged each of the Nutcracker's legs, so that as they took a step forward, their legs snapped and they all fell to the ground. They now posed little threat as they lay on their chests or backs, swinging their sabers futilely in the air, but didn't seem to possess enough free thought to drag themselves along the ground. "Fast thinking, babe," said Tyler. He stood close behind her, ready to shift into a werewolf himself if needed. A cop car came rushing up the road, and 2 gargoyle deputies stepped out, Kipper and Rick. "Everyone good here?" asked Kipper. "We're fine. No one is injured," responded Nick. "Well, out of us anyway." Both Kipper and Rick nodded. "Glad to hear it. There's a bunch of these things, and we're spread pretty thin, only engaging when the citizens can't protect themselves, before getting back into their car and driving off." "So much for getting an idea what the heck is going on," said Eric as he watched the deputy's car whip around a corner off Main Street. A piercing whistle from Roger Grick drew everyone's attention. He carefully placed 4 wood chopping axes just outside his doors, before stepping back inside and locking himself within, pulling down a cage security door as well. The other few town patrons had also thankfully retreated back into their businesses. Grick's store, Land and Feed, was a popular stop for tools and feed. It was dark inside, and Mr. Grick hurriedly disappeared deeper into his store. The 4 men rushed over to the axes, each taking 1. "So what do we do now?" asked Dylan. "Make like the Queen of Hearts," responded Tyler before rushing one of the Nutcrackers and bringing the blade down on its neck. Its arm still helplessly swung, sans head. So Tyler then proceeded to take off its arms as well. He wasn't sure if he'd done enough damage to destroy it as Nick had, but at least it wasn't swinging the sword around anymore. The other 3 followed suit, and soon the remaining 5 Nutcrackers had been reduced to nothing more than a trunk and stubs. "Let's get back inside the bakery," Dylan suggested. "If more of these things show up, we'll deal with it, but I'm guessing the deputies have things under control." The rest of the group nodded in agreement. The storm was clearly getting worse. It was getting darker too, which was causing the temperature to drop fast, and visibility was much worse. They turned to head back to the bakery before Tyler stopped cold. "Where's Crystal?" He was already pulling out his phone, calling her. Eric and Nick split in opposite directions, each of them jogging up and down the street to see if she was in an alley or helping someone. Dylan rushed back into the Witch's Brew, asking if anyone had seen Crystal. He was met with head shakes. "She went up the street," said Greta, an older woman, motioning in the direction that Nick had gone. Dylan nodded his thanks, reminded everyone to stay inside, and headed back out. Eric had come running back up, while Tyler, with a frustrated groan, gave up calling her and put his phone back in his pocket. "Where's Nick?" Eric asked, noticing his best friend hadn't returned. "He headed up the street that way," Dylan answered. Greta said she noticed Crystal had gone that way too. "What?" cried Tyler before tearing off down the street himself. He had left his axe behind as he shifted into his werewolf form. He was faster, stronger, and his senses were sharper. He knew Crystal's scent with perfect clarity. Her shampoo was very distinct in its aroma. Eric snagged Tyler's discarded axe. Dylan placed a hand on Eric's shoulder. "We'll use my car. It has a driver mode feature that lets it grip onto the road." Eric nodded and trailed after Dylan. "Hello, dear, I'm so happy you answered my call," said Granny. Crystal had felt the fey magic ensnare her. She had tried to call out, to resist it, but its insidious pull was too much, keeping her silent and unable to react in any other way but reluctant compliance. "I was hoping to catch another, but she seems to be resisting," Granny said with a shrug. "Oh, but I've been watching, waiting, and I've noticed her fondness towards you, like that of a sister." She ran one of her ice-cold fingers along the side of Crystal's cheek. Crystal shuddered at her touch. She was unable to move back, but her body reacted accordingly. Granny smiled. "Once she finds out that I have you, she should be along in short order." Granny waved a cell phone. "I sent her a text. Plus, my Nutcracker army should still be posing a significant threat to the town." Crystal stood in the main lobby of Normal's library. It was dark, but not empty. A handful of residents had taken refuge here, along with the staff. Each of them was frozen in place, literally. Each of them appeared to be a statue of ice, their skin crystal blue. A thin layer of ice and snow covered the entire library itself. Crystal's breath fogged in front of her. Crystal was already starting to feel the effects of early frostbite, as if she were in a giant industrial freezer. She worried about the people trapped in ice around her. Were they already dead? Could they be saved? Was she next? Crystal considered tapping into her druidic magic, but resisted. Even if she could get off a singular blast of power, it was unlikely this Winter Court Fae would leave herself defenseless, and would most likely be able to retaliate far worse. Granny tapped her fingers against the table she was currently sitting at. Her eyes closed, and a wicked smile upon her lips, as she listened to the chaos and destruction going on around her outside. She could sense her, Heather, somewhere within the town's boundaries, but her true location is hidden, just out of reach. The Nexus had twisted the girl's powers. made her different from what she was originally intended to be. From a sentinel of nature in the mortal realm to something estranged from it. Granny wanted that power for herself. She had been robbed of the light arcane who had so easily and willingly let her in at the summer camp, children who still believed in fairy tales, holding out hope that things like fairy godmothers existed and could magic all bad things and people away, were such easy targets. Yes, that magic-wielding child of light was a prize Granny hated to surrender. But the demi-goddess of nature would far make up for such a loss, a new prize that Granny had come to collect. Her head snapped to the library's main doors as they crashed open and a large werewolf barreled into the main lobby. Granny sighed. She had hoped her Nutcrackers would have put up more of a fight and fright, that authorities would be thoroughly distracted, and Normal's more mundane residents would remain locked inside their business and homes. Apparently, some of the town's people considered themselves heroes. Granny stood and began to unleash a blast of frigid cold at Tyler. Now, Crystal thought, and called forth a pillar of fire down upon Granny. Yes, the Winter Fae had shielded herself from such an attack. But while the column of flame didn't incinerate her, she felt her shield quickly weakening and refocused her power to re-establish her protection magic. This act caused her to release her hold on the girl. Petulant brat, Granny snapped as she flung the rectangular table aside as if nothing more than styrofoam. It cruised through the air and crashed with a thud near the library checkout counter. Crystal, who had rushed toward Tyler, was now clinging to his back. She cringed at the crashing sound, but was thankful it hadn't crushed or shattered the current resident ice sculptures. "Run," she urged Tyler, who made to turn and spring back through the library doors. "I think not, children. Granny needs to teach you a lesson." She waved her hand and a solid wall of ice formed itself in front of the doors. Tyler, not wishing to keep him and Crystal as easy targets, simply readjusted his angle and tore deeper into the library away from the main area, careful to avoid any of the frozen sculptures standing in his way. His heightened werewolf senses noted both the scent of ice and flesh, causing him to have the sickening realization that the statues were actually frozen people. "We need to get out of here," Crystal urged Tyler, gripping her hands into his fur and hugging herself closely to him, embracing the warmth radiating off of him. Tyler was right, Crystal thought. He did run warm. Tyler growled an acknowledgement and rushed towards an emergency exit, only to veer away quickly as 2 Nutcracker guards charged towards them. He dove into some nearby stacks but kept moving as the Nutcrackers were still giving chase. Gargoyles were not actually made of stone, but their skin definitely had similar resistance, hence why Nick had no qualms about throwing himself through one of the main lobby windows. He had been hanging out on the roof across the street from the library waiting for help. He had happened to catch sight of Crystal in the distance, but by the time he got close, she was stepping into the library. He didn't want to rush in blindly as he wasn't sure why Crystal had just taken off. He climbed up to a rooftop across the way to get a better vantage point before charging in. Tyler came barreling down the street in wolf form shortly after, but had crashed through the library doors before he could show his position or join up with him. Nick was just about to crash in after Tyler, but a column of fire momentarily filled the library lobby. Next, a wall of ice went up in front of the main entrance, and Nick noted Tyler, with Crystal on his back, rushing into the book stacks. Nick's attention was then drawn to Dylan's car cruising up the street. Not wanting the car to drive by, as it was unlikely Dylan knew where Tyler had run into, Nick made a hasty decision and glided down from the roof of Hank's Burgers he was currently on, landed in the road, and then sprang forward and through one of the main windows lining the library's front wall, figuring he now had some backup. Nick's excitable entrance quickly drew Granny's attention. "I have enough problems, thank you," Granny said with a wave of her hand, and encased Nick in a block of ice similar to the rest of the townspeople. She then turned and headed towards the book stacks looking for her hostage and the dirty mongrel werewolf. Dylan and Eric stood outside the library back entrance, Eric still gripping 2 axes, one in each hand, They had rushed around the building after seeing the frozen wall of ice barricading the front door. They had no desire to take Nick's impromptu entrance, as the shards of glass from the broken window would easily slice and dice them as they precariously tried to make their way through it. Granted, Dylan could have healed the damage, but glass wounds could get nasty fast. The back door was locked and didn't have a handle. It could only be opened from the inside. The two of them started to make their way back to the front when Irene popped around the corner. "There you are," she said, and ran forward to give her twin a hug. "What are you doing here?" Dylan asked. Eric stood a few steps away, also surprised by the coincidence. Irene held up her cell phone. The two men could see a ping on the screen indicating their location at the library. "I was heading to the Witch's Brew, but the app notified me you were here. One of the customers had answered when I called the bakery and explained you had driven off with Eric." Along with Normal's new Red Alert app, there was an option to connect phones, similar to other locator apps, so that people could more easily find each other in a crisis. "What are you two doing here?" Irene asked. "Honestly, we don't know," said Dylan as he and Eric continued making their way back to the front of the library, Irene in tow. "What?" Irene asked them. "All we know is my brother's girlfriend, Crystal, ran off. We think she's inside the library based on all the weird ice magic, but we aren't sure. Nick is inside too, but he crashed through a window," Eric clarified. As the three of them rounded to the front of the building, they noticed another person standing at the library entrance yelling, "I'm here, you imitation ice queen. Let me in," she demanded. "Heather," the three said in unison. Heather turned at the sound of her name, relief evident on her face as she noticed Dylan and Irene. "What are you doing here?" Irene asked as the three of them joined Heather on the library's main landing. Granny, the winter fae from the summer camp a few months ago, Heather held up her phone, demanded I come to the library or my protege would be taken to the eternal winter of the fae realm. "How did she get your number?" asked Eric. "No idea, but being a fae, she must have called in a favor," Heather said. "Pun intended?" asked Dylan. Both Heather and Irene gave him a scathing look. "Sorry," Dylan muttered. "How do we get inside? The back door was a no-go and we're still being blocked by Wonder Twin Zan. Here," Eric said as he placed his hand against the ice wall. "I could melt it, but it could take time and no promises that it won't just reform. Fae have a better understanding of magic. I don't know what will happen," offered Irene, and she gestured for Eric to step back and started to draw forth her arcane power, only to have the wall disperse from solid ice into a massive flurry of snowflakes. "Convenient," offered Dylan. "Well, time to enter the winter wonderland from hell," said Eric as he handed one axe off to Dylan and stepped inside, double gripping his own. Tyler tore into his fifth Nutcracker. Crystal was feeding druidic magic into him like a nuclear fission. Probably not the best example, seeing as it was nature magic, but Tyler had ended up watching a power plant documentary for extra credit for both science and history class. Either way, he was supercharged. But he wasn't stupid. Druidic or not, Crystal wasn't an endless battery of power, and she would drain herself completely if she tried to maintain this much longer. They needed to find a way out or a place to hide. Tyler had heard the crashing of glass about 10 minutes ago, but figured it was an overeager Nutcracker smashing a window. With a huff, Tyler charged out of the book stacks and found himself back in the main lobby of the library. With all the random running around and fighting, he had gotten turned around and ended up back where he and Crystal started. "Door now," Crystal cried. Tyler noticed the wall of ice disperse into a blizzard of flakes and rushed the door, only to stop short when his stepbrother stepped inside with an axe, followed by the arcane twins of Fire and Light, and none other than the mayor of Normal's daughter. Just as the last of them stepped inside the library, the wall reformed itself. Tyler promptly cursed, but it just sounded like a growl, which briefly drew everyone's attention before they noticed the wall had reformed, trapping them all inside. "Called it," said Irene, which granted her the privilege of being given a scathing look from all three of her companions, before they all took in the scene of frozen townsfolk standing all around them. "Nick!" cried Eric, and he rushed over to the frozen gargoyle statue of his best friend. "Kaito Suru," Thaw, Irene cast, as she approached Nick and placed her hands upon the gargoyle's frozen form. Unlike the solid wall of ice, the magic encasing Nick was less potent, and within short order, Nick was gasping for air as warmth returned to his body. Vigorizar, Vitality, cast Dylan as he fed some of his power into Nick as well to help him stabilize faster. Nick nodded his appreciation to them both as his body stopped shivering uncontrollably and the pain from the magic frostbite receded. His gargoyle form should have been more resilient to the cold. The Fey woman's magic was strong. "Everyone seems to be accounted for," said Heather. "I say we slide out of here." She took a step toward the shattered window only to feel an ice grip clamp itself around her left wrist. She turned to see Granny smiling an inhuman grin of joy as their eyes locked. "Hello, child, I've been waiting." Everyone turned to rush Granny, who simply waved her hand and two portals teared their way through reality and outstepped two very large, muscular, hairy, white, abominable snowmen. "Kill them," Granny ordered, before she vanished into thin air with Heather in hand. "Yay," Nick uttered with false enthusiasm as he took the loosely gripped axe from Dylan's grasp. "I'll take the big stupid and ugly one," said Eric as he tightened the grip on his own axe. Barrera Curativa, Healing Barrier, Dylan cast, weaving in healing magic into the shield spell he had placed upon the two of them earlier in front of the restaurant. If you get hurt, your injuries will heal. But it's limited, so best to still avoid it. "Could have used this to get us through the window," said Eric. "Like I said, limited. Try not to get hit," Dylan retorted. Hono no Yoroi, flame armor, Irene added to her Borther's magic, too. "Hey, it's not cold anymore," Eric said as he examined his arm, noting the magical flames licking his body. "It repels the cold," Irene said. "Like Dylan's spell, it's limited, so the sooner you take care of those two Yetis, the better." Eric and Nick nodded and charged toward the abominable snowman. "We need to get to Heather," said Crystal, "and we have to save these people." She turned to Irene and Dylan. "Can either of you two do anything? I'm all but tapped out keeping Tyler going." Irene and Dylan shook their heads. "We each have a couple spells left in us ourselves. The amount of power it would take to save everyone is beyond us," said Dylan. "Heather's top priority. I don't know what that Fey hag has planned for her, but it can't be good," Irene said as she headed outside the library. Crystal slid off Tyler. She turned to Eric and Nick and noted the two of them had successfully beaten the monsters further back into the library, making sure to avoid any Frozen Town's folk. Both men, with their protective spells and weapons, were making quick work of the two Yeti. The beasts were clearly used to dealing with opponents that were less inept at challenging them. They swung wildly and attempted brute force and strength to bring down their opponents. But Eric and Nick dodged around and utilized their smaller size and own strength to land blow after blow to the monsters. Only for Eric to realize these weren't Nutcracker golems. He pulled out his gun and dropped his Yeti with 3 shots to the head. Everyone looked at him with surprise, the other Yeti included, before he turned and capped the other Yeti 2 times in the head. "Problem solved," Eric said as he reholstered his firearm. "Now what?" "Now we rescue Heather," said Dylan, following his sister outside. Everyone else trailed behind. "You can't hurt me because you need me, and seeing as I'm your only hostage, you can't force me," Heather said. Her arms crossed over her chest, and her tone a mixture of annoyed and superiority. Granny sighed. "Child, I am old, even by Fey standards. Do you honestly think I didn't take this into consideration?" She smiled. "That I didn't have a contingency in place for such resistance." Heather tried to step back, but Granny was surprisingly fast. In one quick motion, Heather felt a golden collar clasp around her neck. "Kneel," commanded Granny. She had a feeling Heather would be able to resist her Fey charms, so she had brought something more potent to entice the woman. Heather found herself taking a knee. No hesitation, no question, no fight, pure subjugation, followed by a sick realization that she was powerless to resist the withered monster standing before her. "We understand one another. Good," said Granny as she traced a chilling, tender finger along Heather's cheek. Heather resisted the urge to jerk away. Despite how her skin was crawling, Granny forcefully grabbed Heather's chin and tilted her head up. Normal is protected by its arcane nexus. It prevents certain forces from sensing the town, hiding it from truly evil things. Yes, Heather answered, unclear what Granny wanted her to say. But she had a sick feeling what Granny wanted her to do. The arcane nexus of Normal, while not a perfect barrier, as plenty of bad things happened in town, still kept away some more horrible creatures. Eldritch in nature, for example. You couldn't have such a collection of supernatural beings in such close proximity without bringing a little attention to yourself. That is why I have brought us here. Granny gestured around Pegasus Park to unravel it. They currently rested in the center of an open field. A good 10 feet away, a number of Nutcracker guards encircled them. Heather counted 6, the rest still causing havoc in town. Heather could feel it, the arcane nexus that Granny was referring to. It wasn't locked away under the museum, mausoleum, or bank, but a public park. The nexus, while not alive, was pulsing with power, its magical ley lines coursing throughout Normal. I can't do that, Heather said. Granny gave a backhand to Heather's right cheek, drawing blood, which Heather spat upon the ground. Granny then entangled her fingers into Heather's hair, yanking her head back. Do not lie to me, child. Her tone was calm, but her ice-blue eyes were wild. I was there. I know what you did, how you unraveled all my hard work. You should have burned alive. A number of Fae, myself among them, would have had they tried to wield the raw, untamed, pure arcane energy of a nexus as you did. It is why I had used the foolish girl as a conduit. I don't know how I did it. I just did. I don't think I can intentionally repeat it, said Heather, resisting the urge to snarl at the woman. Different circumstances, different nexus. Granny nodded her head. Perhaps, but I know you've been training with a Fae of the Spring Court. How to re-establish my divine gifts, not how to tear a nexus apart, Heather said, her voice and eyes starting to show desperation. The collar would compel her to do this, indifferent to the fact she may not be able to accomplish the task. It would force her hand regardless, even if it killed her in the process. Well, Granny said as she released her hold on Heather and taking a few steps back. For your sake, I do hope you can unravel. Granny's command was cut short as a bullet shot its way through her back and out her chest. She looked down at the injury with mild annoyance. By the time she turned, the wound had already closed. Eric stood alone near the edge of the clearing, his body still licked in flames as Irene's first shield still held. The protection may be limited, but the spell was still going strong. His gun was still aimed towards Granny. Kill him, she ordered. The encircling Nutcrackers turned as one and proceeded to march towards Eric. Eric responded by saluting Granny and running back into the wooded part of Pegasus Park. Granny narrowed her eyes and opened up her magical senses. As a Fae, especially as old as she was able to perceive the presence of magical aurors given off by other supernaturals. Pinpointing their exact location was difficult, but she could sense when they were close by. Granny's eyes widened as the arcane pyro woman came charging towards her, riding a horse made entirely of fire. Granny proceeded to call forth large shards of ice to spring forth from the ground, hoping to skewer the woman dead. Any ice spikes that got close evaporated to steam in an instant. Granny snarled. Irene continued to focus all of her power into maintaining the horse and her own fire shield. Her magic was quickly depleting, and she would need food and to sleep for a week after tonight. But that wasn't important right now. What was important was keeping Granny distracted. Dylan was mounted on Tyler, maintaining a healing barrier around the both of them. Like his sister, he was expending his last dregs of magic, too. Tyler was quick to dodge and rebound off the large ice shards erupting from the ground. He was thankful Crystal had opted to stay behind. She had already utilized her power in keeping Tyler going in the library. She would have only been a distraction here. Both Irene and the two of them kept getting closer and closer to Granny. They each took a final leap to close the distance, only for Granny to expand out a miniature blizzard around herself, entrapping them all. The open field they were in experienced below freezing temperatures, harsh winds, and a flurry of blinding snow. You dare to defy me, said Granny, her voice calm and quiet, every one of them hearing her speak within their minds. I am winter itself, an ancient of immeasurable power, a force beyond anything you children could hope to stop, Granny continued. My patience has reached its end. You will know death tonight, and the girl, Granny waved her hand and the blizzard dissipated around them. She will do as I command, she turned to Heather. Unravel thee, Granny's voice froze. A man with coal-black hair stood beside Heather. He currently held the golden collar between his hands, examining its craftsmanship, his eyes a rich dark brown. A close-trimmed beard framed his jaw. He wore a business suit of pure black, clearly tailored to show off his physique. He held up a hand when Granny went to speak. The Fae found herself unable to resist his will. It's rare that I find myself in town during such events. I have many demands outside of my role here as mayor, hence why my wife handles the more mundane issues. By happenstance, I happen to be stopping by for dinner with my family this evening. He paused, his eyes taking on a more threatening gleam. The evening in which you attack my town, your toys have killed, maimed, and slaughtered my people. You froze a majority of its denizens as well. Harold snapped the collar in two, as if it was nothing but a cheap chain costume necklace. He tossed the pieces aside like garbage, then took a step forward. Granny took an involuntary one back. All that I could understand, it is the nature of winter, is it not? He smiled at Granny. She didn't return the sentiment. But you had the audacity to kidnap, enslave, and risk my daughter's life, an edge had entered Harold's voice. Granny swallowed. Once she had done as I asked, she would have been free. I would have gladly returned her to you. Harold smiled. You are most fortunate that it is I who stand before you and not my wife. She is far less forgiving when it comes to those who would do her children harm. An unfortunate possibility, but unlikely. My magic is great. Any damage would have been mended, I assure you, Lord of Death. Harold's eyes seemed to ignite with a hint of power at the mention of his former title, one that he had delegated to his 3 sons a decade ago. Dylan had made his way over to his sister and helped her to stand up. Tyler had made his way to Heather, who stood beside him taking in his warmth. Thankfully, the blizzard had only lasted a moment. Their shield magic had lasted long enough to withstand the worst of it. Heather had been shielded by her father. Eric chose that moment to come rushing out of the woods as he was being chased by 4 Nutcrackers and no longer protected by a fire shield. He had somehow managed to eliminate, or at least evade, 2 of the 6. Stand down, said Granny. The remaining Nutcracker battalion, even those within the town itself, came to a stop. I have overstepped. My deepest apologies, Granny said with a nod of submission. One the mayor of Normal acknowledged in kind. Leave, he ordered. Granny nodded once more, and within short order Granny, her winter, and her golem army vanished. Harold turned to acknowledge the group behind him. Thank you. Had she succeeded in her goal, it would have been most unpleasant for the town. Turning to his daughter, will you be returning home? Heather nodded. I'll send the car, and with that he was gone. How did he know? Asked Heather. How did you even find me? Harmony's divination magic. Crystal had a floral pen you had gifted her. Harmony was able to use it to point us in the right direction, said Dylan. Nick got to your father. He was the best choice to get to the manor quickly, with the bad roads and everything, said Eric. We didn't know what Granny was planning, but figured it had to be pretty bad. When Harmony told us Pegasus Park, Irene and I assumed it had something to do with the Nexus, Dylan piped in. So, Tyler chimed in, after shifting back to human form, we focused on getting here and acting as a distraction. Heather nodded her understanding and her appreciation, but the look of worry on her face still remained. Hey, it's over now, we won, said Irene. But it's not over. Granny may be gone, but more trouble is going to come to Normal, Heather said. And we'll deal with it, like we always do, said Dylan. No one said living in a town of supernatural monsters and magic users was going to be safe or easy. But the question is why, said Heather. Why want to undo the Nexus? So the town was vulnerable. Imagine all the wild magic that would happen with an unraveled Nexus, said Eric. Exactly, Heather agreed, which means that whatever Granny was planning, That wasn't the end goal, but the first step for something bigger, more dangerous. "I don't think you're wrong," said Irene, who was desperately wanting to get back home and eat something before passing out from magical exertion. "But I think the only way we're going to figure that out is to wait and see." "That's not a plan, not one I agree with," Heather argued. "We saw what happened with Granny's surprise attack tonight. I'm not interested in waiting around. I'm going to get some answers." Heather headed off. "Help Irene and Dylan get home," Eric ordered Tyler before he went after Heather. "So what's the plan?" Eric asked Heather once the two of them exited the park. "Talk to my aunt," said Heather. It took Eric a moment to connect the dots once he realized what Heather was intending to do. "Do we get to them through your house?" asked Eric. "Yes," Heather said. Eric pulled out his cell phone and speed-dialed Nick. "Nick the Awesome here," said Nick. "How did the fight go? Was the mayor able to help? Is everyone okay?" Eric rolled his eyes. "Storm is gone, along with Granny and her goons, Batman. Everyone is fine. Look, are you still at the manor?" "Yeah, but I'll be leaving shortly," Nick said before biting into a lemon cookie. He had been offered tea and biscuits, as a reward for his heroism. "Stay there, Heather and I are on our way now. She's going to need our help," Eric said. "Roger, Roger," responded Nick before ending the call. "I can manage on my own. Despite what just happened, I don't need you and Nick to tag along," Heather said. "Yeah, look, I'm not trying to be a jerk here, but I think you could use the extra help. And like it or not, Nick and I are your best option. Everyone else is either helping clean up the mess Granny caused or recovering from it," Eric said, giving a helpless shrug. "Comforting," said Heather, but she didn't bother to argue further. They had reached the edge of the block before one of her father's cars pulled up next to them. Eric held the back passenger door open for Heather. She entered begrudgingly. Eric followed. They rode in silence to the manor and their next adventure.